The rise of Julius Caesar, a populist leader or a calculated strategist. Imagine a man who could command armies, charm the masses, and outmaneuver the most powerful politicians of his time. A man whose name would echo through the ages, synonymous with both greatness and tyranny. This is the story of Julius Caesar, a figure who defies simple categorization. Was he a military tyrant who sought absolute power, or a savior of Rome who aimed to restore the Republic? This question has been debated for centuries, and in this video, we'll dive deep into Caesar's reforms, his political maneuvers, and the legacy he left behind. By the end of this series, you'll have a clearer picture of whether Caesar was a hero, a villain, or something in between. But before we delve into the complexities of Caesar's character, let's set the stage. Rome in the 1st century BC was a city in turmoil. The Republic, once a beacon of democracy and governance, was crumbling under the weight of corruption, inequality, and political infighting. Into this chaos stepped Julius Caesar, a man with a vision for Rome's future. But was that vision one of reform and renewal, or one of personal ambition and power? Let's find out. Julius Caesar was born into a patrician family, the gens Julia, which traced its lineage back to the goddess Venus. But by the time of Caesar's birth in 100 BC, the family's fortunes had waned. Despite this, Caesar was determined to restore his family's prestige. His early career was marked by a series of calculated moves, each one bringing him closer to the center of Roman power. Caesar's first major step was his election as Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of Rome, in 63 BC. This position, while largely ceremonial, gave Caesar significant influence over religious and political matters. It was also a testament to his growing popularity among the Roman people. But Caesar's ambitions didn't stop there. He knew that to achieve true power, he would need to align himself with Rome's most influential figures. In 59 BC, Caesar formed the first triumvirate with Pompey and Crassus, two of Rome's most powerful men. This alliance was less about shared ideals and more about mutual benefit. Pompey, a celebrated general, needed land for his veterans. Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome, sought financial gain and political influence. And Caesar, he needed political support to further his ambitions. The triumvirate was a masterstroke of political maneuvering. Together, the three men bypassed the Senate and pushed through reforms that benefited the masses. One of the most significant of these was Caesar's land reform bill, which aimed to distribute land to 20,000 of Rome's poorest citizens. But was this reform truly for the people, or was it a strategic move to secure public support? The land reform bill was a bold move, and it showcased Caesar's political acumen. The bill was cleverly designed to avoid financial burden on the Senate, using Pompey's wealth from the east to fund the reform. Land would be bought from owners at the price it had been assessed at in the tax lists, ensuring fairness. A board of 20 would oversee the redistribution, with Caesar exempting himself to avoid accusations of bias. But the Senate, led by figures like Cato and Cicero, vehemently opposed the bill. They saw it as a threat to their power and privilege. When the Senate refused to pass the bill, Caesar took it directly to the people, where it received overwhelming support. This move was a clear challenge to the Senate's authority, and it marked a turning point in Roman politics. The bill was eventually passed, but not without consequences. Caesar's actions alienated many in the Senate, and his alliance with Pompey and Crassus began to show cracks. The assassination attempt by Lucius Vettius, allegedly orchestrated by Caesar's political enemies, further highlighted the dangers of his populist agenda. Despite the risks, Caesar continued to push for reforms, setting the stage for his eventual rise to dictatorship. The land reform bill was a resounding success among the masses, but it came at a cost. Caesar's willingness to bypass the Senate and manipulate the political system alienated many of Rome's elite. His alliance with Pompey and Crassus, once a source of strength, began to unravel. Pompey, in particular, grew increasingly wary of Caesar's growing power and popularity. But Caesar was undeterred. He knew that his future lay in the support of the Roman people, and he continued to champion their cause. His reforms, while controversial, addressed long-standing issues in Roman society, from land distribution to debt relief. But were these reforms driven by a genuine desire to help the people, or were they a calculated move to secure his own power? Julius Caesar's rise to power is a study in contrasts. On one hand, His reforms undeniably benefited the poor and addressed long-standing issues in Roman society. On the other hand, his willingness to bypass the Senate and manipulate the political system suggests a more self-serving agenda. Caesar's legacy is a testament to the duality of his character, a man who could be both a champion of the people and a ruthless political operator. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Caesar's story is the way it reflects the broader struggles of the Roman Republic. Caesar's rise to power was not just the story of one man's ambition, it was the story of a society in crisis. The Republic, once a model of governance, was no longer able to address the needs of its people. Caesar's reforms, while controversial, were an attempt to address these issues, but in doing so, he set the stage for the end of the Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire. As we conclude this first part of our series, it's clear that Julius Caesar was a man of contradictions. He was a populist who championed the cause of the poor, but also a political operator who manipulated the system to his advantage. His reforms brought stability to Rome, but they also set the stage for the end of the Republic. In the next episode, we'll explore Caesar's dictatorship and the reforms he implemented during his time in power. Was he a benevolent reformer seeking to stabilize Rome, or an autocratic tyrant consolidating his rule? The answer, as we'll see, is far from simple. So stay tuned, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into the fascinating world of history. Caesar's dictatorship, benevolent reformer or autocratic tyrant? Picture this: Rome, 46 BC. The dust has barely settled from the Battle of Thapsus, where Julius Caesar emerged victorious over the remnants of the Pompeian faction. The Roman Republic, once a symbol of governance and order, is now a shadow of its former self. Into this fractured world steps Caesar, not as a mere consul or general, but as dictator, a title that grants him unprecedented power. But how did he use this power? Was he a benevolent reformer seeking to stabilize Rome, or an autocratic tyrant consolidating his rule? In this episode, we'll explore Caesar's actions as dictator and the impact they had on Rome. But before we dive into the complexities of Caesar's dictatorship, let's set the stage. Rome was in chaos. Decades of civil war, political infighting, and economic instability had left the Republic on the brink of collapse. The people were desperate for stability, and Caesar promised just that. But at what cost? Let's find out. Upon returning to Rome, Caesar wasted no time in making his presence felt. He organized grand games, complete with elephants, gladiators, and even mock naval battles. These spectacles were unlike anything Rome had ever seen. They were a celebration of Caesar's victories, but they were also a message to the people. Rome was back, and Caesar was its savior. But not everyone was impressed. Critics saw the games as extravagant and in poor taste, especially given the economic hardships many Romans were facing. So, were these games merely a display of Caesar's wealth and power, or were they a genuine attempt to unite the people and restore morale after years of civil war? The answer, as with so much of Caesar's reign, is complex. On one hand, the games were a masterstroke of public relations. They showcased Caesar's generosity and his ability to bring prosperity to Rome. On the other hand, they were a stark reminder of the growing divide between Caesar and the Senate. While the people cheered the elite seat, Caesar's games were a symbol of his growing power, and they set the stage for the political battles that would follow. As dictator, Caesar wielded immense power, including the authority to regulate the behavior of Rome's elite. He used his censorial powers to impose restrictions on luxury goods, a move that harkened back to traditional Republican values. But Caesar didn't stop there. He also introduced measures to encourage larger families, offering financial incentives to those who had more children. The goal was to boost Rome's declining population, which had been decimated by years of war. These reforms were popular among the masses, but they also drew criticism from the elite. Some saw them as an overreach of power, while others viewed them as a thinly veiled attempt to control the aristocracy. But were these measures truly about restoring the Republic, or were they the first steps toward a more centralized form of government? Historians have long debated this question. Some argue that Caesar's reforms were a genuine attempt to address the moral and social decay that had plagued Rome. Others see them as a precursor to the autocratic regime of the Roman emperors. Whatever the case, there's no denying that Caesar's censorial powers marked a significant shift in Roman governance. One of Caesar's most significant acts as dictator was the demobilization of his veteran legions, including the famed 10th Legion. This move was symbolic. signaling the end of the civil war and Caesar's desire for peace. But it also had practical implications. By disbanding his army, Caesar reduced the risk of military rebellion and demonstrated his confidence in his political control. However, this decision would later come back to haunt him. Without his loyal legions, Caesar was vulnerable to assassination. But at the time, the demobilization was seen as a bold and necessary step. It was a message to the people and the Senate alike. Caesar was not a military dictator, but a leader who sought peace and stability. Caesar's policy of clemency was one of his most admired traits. He pardoned his enemies, restored the statues of Pompey, and even welcomed former adversaries like Brutus and Cassius back into the Senate. This magnanimity earned him praise from historians like Dio and Plutarch, who saw it as a stark contrast to the brutality of Sulla. But was Caesar's clemency a genuine attempt at reconciliation, or a calculated move to keep his enemies indebted to him? Cicero, one of Caesar's most vocal critics, argued the latter. He believed that Caesar's mercy was a tool of control rather than a virtue. By pardoning his enemies, Caesar ensured their loyalty, or at least their silence. This policy of clemency was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it helped to stabilize Rome and prevent further bloodshed. On the other hand, it alienated many of Caesar's supporters, who saw it as a sign of weakness. In the end, Caesar's clemency would prove to be both his greatest strength and his greatest vulnerability. Caesar's dictatorship is a study in contrasts. On one hand, his reforms brought stability and addressed long-standing issues in Roman society. On the other hand, his consolidation of power and disregard for traditional republican institutions set a dangerous precedent. Whether Caesar was a benevolent reformer or an autocratic tyrant depends on one's perspective, but there's no denying that his actions forever changed the course of Roman history. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Caesar's dictatorship is the way it reflects the broader struggles of the Roman Republic. Caesar's rise to power was not just the story of one man's ambition, it was the story of a society in crisis. The Republic, once a model of governance, was no longer able to address the needs of its people. Caesar's reforms, while controversial, were an attempt to address these issues. But in doing so, he set the stage for the end of the Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire. As we conclude this second part of our series, it's clear that Julius Caesar was a man of contradictions. He was a reformer who sought to stabilize Rome, but also a dictator who consolidated power at the expense of the Republic. His actions as dictator were both praised and criticized, and his legacy remains a topic of debate to this day. In the next episode, we'll explore Caesar's reforms in greater detail, from land redistribution to provincial governance. Were these reforms designed to strengthen the Republic, or were they the first steps toward an imperial system? The answer, as we'll see, is far from simple. So stay tuned, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into the fascinating world of history. Caesar's reforms, building a new Rome or laying the groundwork for empire. Imagine a Rome where the streets are no longer filled with the cries of the poor, where corruption is a thing of the past, and where the provinces are no longer exploited but integrated into the fabric of the Republic. This was the vision Julius Caesar had for Rome. As dictator, he implemented a series of sweeping reforms that touched nearly every aspect of Roman society. From land redistribution to provincial governance, his policies were ambitious and far-reaching. But were these reforms designed to strengthen the Republic, or were they the first steps toward an imperial system? In this episode, we'll examine Caesar's reforms and their lasting impact on Rome. But before we dive into the details, let's set the stage. Rome in the 1st century BC was a city in crisis. Decades of civil war, political infighting, and economic instability had left the Republic on the brink of collapse. The people were desperate for change, and Caesar promised just that. But at what cost? Let's find out. One of Caesar's most significant reforms was the reduction of the grain dole from 320,000 to 150,000 recipients. This move was intended to ensure that only the poorest citizens received state support, alleviating the strain on Rome's resources. Additionally, Caesar initiated the repopulation of Carthage and Corinth, providing land and opportunities for thousands of Roman citizens. These measures were popular among the masses, but they also raised questions about Caesar's long-term goals. Was he trying to create a more equitable society, or was he simply consolidating his power base? The land redistribution program was particularly controversial. By providing land to the poor, Caesar addressed a long-standing issue in Roman society, but the elite saw it as a threat to their power and privilege. The Senate, already wary of Caesar's growing influence, viewed these reforms with suspicion. Was Caesar truly a champion of the people, or was he using the masses as a stepping stone to power? Debt had been a major issue in Rome for decades, exacerbated by the civil war. Caesar's debt reform required that debts be repaid at a rate proportional to the debtor's wealth, a move aimed at curbing usury and economic instability. While this reform was welcomed by many, it's also alienated the wealthy elite, who saw it as an attack on their financial interests. Caesar's ability to balance the needs of the poor with the demands of the elite was a testament to his political skill. But it also highlighted the growing divide between the two classes. The debt reform was a bold move, but it came at a cost. By alienating the elite, Caesar risked further destabilizing an already fragile political system. Caesar's reforms extended beyond Rome to the provinces, where corruption and abuse of power were rampant. He introduced measures to limit the power of provincial governors, including restrictions on bribery and the requirement for detailed financial records. Additionally, Caesar extended citizenship rights to Cisalpine Gaul, a move that began the process of integrating the provinces into the Roman Republic. These reforms were long overdue, but they also raised questions about Caesar's motivations. Was he trying to create a more just and efficient system, or was he simply trying to prevent others from amassing the kind of power he had? The extension of citizenship rights to Cisalpine Gaul was particularly significant. It marked a shift in Roman policy, from exploitation to integration. But was this shift driven by a genuine desire to improve the lives of the provincials, or was it a calculated move to secure their loyalty? One of Caesar's most controversial reforms was the expansion of the Senate from 400 to 900 members. This move included the induction of ex-soldiers, sons of freedmen, and even provincials, a radical departure from tradition. While this reform was praised by some as a step toward a more inclusive government, others saw it as a way for Caesar to pack the Senate with his allies. Dio, in particular, was critical of this move, arguing that it diluted the quality of the Senate and undermined its authority. But was Dio's criticism justified? Or was Caesar's expansion of the Senate a necessary step to address the political and social changes that had taken place in Rome? The answer, as with so much of Caesar's reign, is complex. Caesar's reforms were ambitious and far-reaching, but their legacy is mixed. On one hand, they addressed many of the issues that had plagued Rome for decades, from economic inequality to provincial corruption. On the other hand, they also laid the groundwork for the imperial system that would eventually replace the Republic. Whether Caesar intended to create an empire or simply reform the Republic is a matter of debate, but there's no denying that his actions had a profound impact on the course of Roman history. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Caesar's reforms is the way they reflect the broader struggles of the Roman Republic. Caesar's rise to power was not just the story of one man's ambition, it was the story of a society in crisis. The Republic, once a model of governance, was no longer able to address the needs of its people. Caesar's reforms, while controversial, were an attempt to address these issues, but in doing so, he set the stage for the end of the Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire. As we conclude this third part of our series, it's clear that Julius Caesar was a man of contradictions. He was a reformer who sought to stabilize Rome, but also a dictator who consolidated power at the expense of the Republic. His reforms were both praised and criticized, and his legacy remains a topic of debate to this day. In the next episode, we'll explore the events leading up to Caesar's assassination and the consequences of his death. Was his assassination the end of a dream, or the birth of an empire? The answer, as we'll see, is far from simple. So stay tuned, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into the fascinating world of history. The assassination of Julius Caesar, the end of a dream, or the birth of an empire. Imagine this. March 1540 BC. The Roman Senate is in session. Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in Rome, enters the chamber. He is confident, perhaps even arrogant, as he takes his seat. But little does he know that a group of senators, led by his trusted friend Brutus, are about to commit one of the most infamous acts in history. Within moments, Caesar is surrounded. Daggers flash. The man who had brought stability to Rome, who had reformed its laws and expanded its borders, falls to the ground, bleeding from 23 stab wounds. His last words, according to legend, are, "Et tu, brute, you too." Brutus. This is the story of Julius Caesar's assassination, an event that marked the end of the Roman Republic and the beginning of the Roman Empire. But what led to this moment? Was Caesar's death the result of his own ambition, or was it a desperate act by men who feared the loss of their republic? In this final episode, we'll explore the events leading up to Caesar's assassination, the conspiracy behind it, and its far-reaching consequences. The conspiracy to assassinate Caesar was driven by a mix of fear and personal ambition. Many senators feared that Caesar's growing power would lead to the end of the Republic. They saw him as a tyrant in the making, a man who would destroy the traditions and institutions that had made Rome great. But was Caesar truly a tyrant, or was he simply a victim of his own success? The answer lies in the complex of the politics and personal relationships that defined Rome in the 1st century BC. Caesar's reforms, while popular with the masses, had alienated the elite. His expansion of the Senate, his land redistribution programs, and his clemency toward former enemies were seen as threats to the established order. The Senate, once the center of Roman power, felt marginalized and powerless. For men like Brutus and Cassius, Caesar's assassination was not just an act of political necessity, it was a moral duty. But the conspiracy was not just about politics, it was also deeply personal. Brutus, in particular, had a complicated relationship with Caesar. He was not only a senator, but also Caesar's protege and, according to some accounts, his illegitimate son. For Brutus, the decision to join the conspiracy was a painful one. He was torn between his loyalty to Caesar and his belief in the Republic. In the end, his love for Rome won out. The assassination of Caesar was a carefully planned act, but it was also a desperate move by a group of senators who felt they had no other choice. The conspirators, known as the Liberators, believed that by killing Caesar, they could restore the Republic. But their actions had the opposite effect. Instead of saving the Republic, they plunged Rome into another civil war, paving the way for the rise of Augustus and the Roman Empire. The assassination itself was brutal and chaotic. Caesar was stabbed 23 times, with each conspirator taking a turn to ensure their complicity. According to the historian Suetonius, Caesar's last words were not the famous "et tu, brute," but rather a gasp of surprise as he realized the extent of the betrayal. Whatever his final words, the message was clear. Caesar had been betrayed by those he trusted most. But the conspirators' plan did not go as expected. Instead of being hailed as heroes, they were met with confusion and anger. The people of Rome, who had benefited from Caesar's reforms, were outraged by his murder. The Senate, far from being restored, was thrown into chaos. The Republic, already weakened by decades of civil war, was now on the brink of collapse. In the aftermath of Caesar's assassination, Rome descended into chaos. The conspirators, led by Brutus and Cassius, fled the city, hoping to rally support in the provinces. But they were no match for Caesar's heirs, Mark Antony and Octavian, later Augustus. The two men formed the second triumvirate with Lepidus, and together they hunted down the conspirators. The final showdown came at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC. Brutus and Cassius, realizing that their cause was lost, chose to take their own lives rather than face capture. With their deaths, the last hope of restoring the Republic was extinguished. The Roman world was now divided between Antony and Octavian, and their rivalry would soon lead to another civil war. In the end, it was Octavian who emerged victorious. After defeating Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, he became the undisputed ruler of Rome. In 27 BC, he was granted the title Augustus, marking the beginning of the Roman Empire. The Republic was dead, and Caesar's dream of a new Rome had been realized, but not in the way he had intended. Julius Caesar's legacy is one of the most debated in history. Was he a hero who sought to reform a corrupt system, or a villain who sought absolute power? The truth lies somewhere in between. Caesar was a complex figure, capable of both great generosity and ruthless ambition. His reforms brought stability to Rome, but they also set the stage for the end of the Republic. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Caesar's story is the way it reflects the broader struggles of the Roman Republic. Caesar's rise to power was not just the story of one man's ambition, it was the story of a society in crisis. The Republic, once a model of governance, was no longer able to address the needs of its people. Caesar's reforms, while controversial, were an attempt to address these issues, but in doing so, he set the stage for the end of the Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire. As we conclude this series, It's clear that Julius Caesar was a man of contradictions. He was a reformer who sought to stabilize Rome, but also a dictator who consolidated power at the expense of the Republic. His assassination was both the end of a dream and the birth of an empire. Caesar's legacy is a testament to the duality of human nature, the capacity for both greatness and destruction. His reforms brought stability to Rome, but they also set the stage for the rise of the Roman Empire. His assassination was a desperate act by men who feared the loss of their republic, but it ultimately led to the very thing they sought to prevent. So, was Julius Caesar a military tyrant or a savior of Rome? The answer, as we've seen, is far from simple. He was both a hero and a villain, a reformer and a dictator. His story is a reminder that history is rarely black and white. It is filled with shades of gray. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life and legacy of Julius Caesar. If you enjoyed this series, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into the fascinating world of history. Until next time.